Protesters set a restaurant ablaze while a police chief quits as another African-American died on a turbulent night in Ventura in the US. In the main stories of the week, Black Lives Matter protesters in Seattle occupy 6 blocks in the city centre, declaring it an autonomous zone. President Trump demands law and order and threatens to send in the army. Combat. We do apologise, we had sound problems. The increasing militarisation of the US police is in the spotlight. Hello, good morning, welcome. The latest developments and a look back too at the last 7 days. You're watching the weekly here on RT International. Now, another black man has died at the hands of police, sparking violent unrest in the US city of Atlanta. The city's police chief resigned after his officer fatally shot the African-American man while he was being arrested on Saturday night. Rashard Brooks was asleep in his car, blocking the drive-through of a Wendy's fast food restaurant late on Friday. An official report says employees called police to complain. When officers arrived, Brooks failed a breath test but then resisted arrest. Investigators claim in the struggle he managed to grab one of the officers' tasers before fleeing. Police pursued on foot, and during the chase, Brooks was said to have turned and pointed the taser at an officer. It was at this point he was reportedly shot. Brooks was taken to hospital but died after surgery. A lawyer for the family claims police acted atrociously.
As he lays there dying, the officers stand around. One kicks him and flips him over. And then the witnesses tell us that, which we can't see on camera, but they filmed it. They went and picked up the shell casings. I wonder why. So that all of you can't know how far away he was when they shot? But they appear to be caring more about covering their tracks than providing aid. Aid that could have saved his life. I can even say we want justice, but I don't even care anymore. I don't even know what that is. And I've been doing this for 15 years. I don't know what justice is anymore.
Well, following the incident, Atlanta's mayor said that the officer in question has been sacked, while the city's police chief has resigned.
While there may be debate as to whether this was an appropriate use of deadly force, I firmly believe that there is a clear distinction between what you can do and what you should do. I do not believe that this was a justified use of deadly force and have called for the immediate termination of the officer. Chief Shields has offered to immediately step aside as police chief so that the city may move forward with urgency in rebuilding the trust so desperately needed throughout our community.
It is almost 3 weeks since George Floyd was killed at the hands of police in Minneapolis. On Tuesday, the man whose death sparked nationwide race riots in the US was buried in a small private funeral in his hometown of Houston in Texas. Earlier on the same day, thousands said their final farewells to the victim of police brutality. On Tuesday, around 6,000 mourners filed past George Floyd's coffin in Houston, the final stop in a series of memorials held in his honour. Around $30,000 was spent on his gold casket, with the money taken from a record-breaking fundraising campaign that amassed nearly $13 million. The fallout from Floyd's death has provoked claims politicians are trying to use it to score political points. Democrats, for example, were criticised by some for kneeling for an 8-minute silence in Congress, the length of time prosecutors say Floyd was pinned under a white police officer's knee before he died.
Every American should try to stand in silence for 8 minutes and 46 seconds to acknowledge the pain of George Floyd and the pain of racism.
It's hard enough to grieve, but it's much harder to do it in public. It's much harder with the whole world watching. We're an incredible family. His little daughter was there, the one who said, "Daddy's going to change the world," and I think her daddy is going to change the world.
Hopefully George is looking down right now and saying, "This is a great thing that's happening for our country. This is a great, great day in terms of equality. I just want to finish by saying, to save the economy, we passed several pieces of critical legislation.
I wore this tie on purpose. Floyd was a tremendous athlete, so this is an honor as George Floyd.
Right across from Texas Southern, where I played basketball.
Well, the Democrats have proposed a Justice in Policing Act, which would make it easier to prosecute misconduct and require local police to report data on the use of force. Officers would also be obliged to undergo bias training, and chokeholds and other dangerous practices would be prohibited. All uniformed federal officers would also need to carry body cameras. Political commentator and contributor for RedState.com, Jeff Charles, believes there's a clear political motivation behind the moves.
You know what they say, right? I mean, never let a good crisis go to waste. There will definitely be people from both sides who are going to capitalize on what happened to George Floyd to bolster their political careers. It is an election year, so it's hard to tell whether or not the people really pushing for this are really wanting to affect change, or if they're posturing for November. The true test of whether people really want to affect change will occur after the election is over. If this is still going to be an issue that we're going to be pushing in our media and also at a political level as well, then it is possible for positive change to come.
Now, at the beginning of the week, Black Lives Matter protesters seized control and barricaded themselves into 6 blocks of central Seattle. They are calling the area the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, and their move came after police had retreated from the neighbourhood. Also, hundreds of demonstrators, led by the local council, occupied the City Hall. Protesters inside were calling for the city's mayor to quit, and as according to them, she had not been strict enough implementing reforms, while the key demand of all demonstrators is for the police to be defunded. One of their goals is to build a community inside the zone without any need for police. Well, some of those who occupied the City Hall claim that the community and not politicians should control decision making. The Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ, is a self-declared commune. No police or cars are allowed into the area, and reports suggest some of those inside the zone are armed. The city's mayor later, though, defended the protesters, saying that they are just patriots. Online, there's been a mixed reaction to the commune. Meanwhile, President Trump has demanded law and order in Seattle. He also called out those he felt responsible, saying all this has happened in a radical left Democratic state. Later, Trump threatened to send in the army too if the local authorities don't deal with the situation. But the concept of law and order has been on the lips of both Republican and Democrat presidents for more than 5 decades.
Law and Order, perhaps more familiar as the popular TV show, running for 3 decades already.
Law and Order.
But also, exactly what's triggered nationwide protests across the United States.
Law and order is the first responsibility of government.
Don't send people up there that come home and talk tough on law and order and crime and then go back and vote some other way.
We're allowed to assault and humiliate the symbol of law and order, a policeman on the campus, and that was the moment when the ringleaders should have been taken by the scruff of the neck and thrown out of the university once and for all.
By law and order, I mean law and order for everybody. We've got to reestablish respect for law, respect for order.
Law and Order, a concept that's existed since the founding fathers. The catchphrase that helped take Richard Nixon to the White House during mass civil unrest and race riots. Around 200 people died back then in clashes. Martin Luther King was assassinated. So waving in a new era for society, Nixon proposed an agenda in which police powers were about to increase. In 1968, the green light was given to the use of stop and search, and powers have expanded since. In New York, it became infamous, with stops dramatically increasing under Mayor Michael Bloomberg in the 2000s. But it raised a key issue: racial prejudice. During the peak of the program, more than half of the people stopped were black. But the black community made up just over 1/4 of New York's population.
Stop and frisk started in New York. We saw it in Philadelphia. We saw it in California. We saw it in San Francisco. And today we saying it's over.
As new ways to keep order were introduced, laws became tougher. Since 1994, 28 states have adopted some form of what's known as the three-strike practice. It meant lengthy sentences for repeat offenders, even life behind bars. The policy came in as the war on drugs peaked, which raised further questions of racial targeting. At the turn of the century, more than half of all inmates serving time for drug offences in state prisons were black. 3 years ago, it was still around 30%, despite only being 13% of the population as a whole. With both police powers and sentencing increased, prison numbers skyrocketed. There are more black people than any other racial group behind bars in America. Something that has not changed under Bill Clinton, George Bush, or Barack Obama. For every 100,000 people in the US, sentences for black people are 5 times higher than whites. So Law and Order, it was a response to rioting, like the unrest ravaging the United States from coast to coast in 2020, provoked by police actions. It happened in Los Angeles in '92, after the beating of Rodney King by the authorities. It happened after the 2014 shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson. A year later in Baltimore with the death of Freddie Gray. In the last 5 years on record, the number of those fatally shot by the police per million people is higher among blacks than any other ethnicity. And now history is repeating itself. Yet another police-related death has provoked unrest, and again triggered discussion on black rights. So as we look back on what's unfolded since Nixon and his slogan in the 60s, Donald Trump has reassured the nation now, saying,
I am your president of law and order.
For Law and Order do come at a time when police in the US are becoming increasingly militarised. Many forces now boast the kind of hardware previously only seen in frontline combat abroad. Artist Caleb Moppin explains.
Predator drones are a staple of U.S. foreign policy. They have been used in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bosnia, Serbia, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, and now Minneapolis. Though the protesters didn't see it, it was flying over their heads in order to help federal officials gain situation awareness. And though reports indicate it was unarmed, people are angry and afraid.
The deployment of drones and officers to surveil protests is a gross abuse of authority, and is particularly chilling when used against Americans who are protesting law enforcement brutality.
It appears that the war on terror has come home. The mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles built by the U.S. military to withstand IED attacks in Iraq have been rolling down American streets as well. The 1033 program allows the U.S. military to provide local police departments with weapons. Local police can order weapons like grenade launchers, automatic rifles, and bayonets, as well as body armor, robots, aircraft, watercraft, and surveillance drones. These are Defense Department products deemed to be excessive, old, or surplus. $7.4 billion worth of Defense Department property has been provided to over 8,000 different law enforcement agencies by the 1033 program. Ex-New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg once referred to the New York City Police Department saying, "I have my own army in the NYPD, the 7th largest army in the world." Well, with lots of military equipment, the NYPD certainly does seem like an army. Barack Obama rolled back the program after the Ferguson protests and national outrage about the militarization of police.
Move! Get out of the way! Back up! Back up! Back up! Get out of the way! Back up!
However, Trump has revived the program. Now, many are asking the question, why does the Department of Defense have so much excess gear that it needs to unload anyway?
The U.S. has been involved in so many wars. They become occupations, and the military has developed techniques for operating as an occupying army, and they've brought these home. They brought the war home. After they buy these things, and the military, uses some of them, they become surplus. Or if they don't buy them all, the military orders a certain number, and then they back out of buying some of it. So a lot of this stuff is sitting in military warehouses, and so they want to get rid of them. And basically Congress passed a law saying that these things are to be given to police departments. So we have the ridiculous situation where small towns are being given MRAPs. They're totally impractical. They don't make any sense. They're terribly intimidating, though. And that's part of the purpose, I guess.
For years, Americans have been told that the military budget is necessary to keep them safe and protect them from bad actors around the world. But it's starting to look like the bad guys these weapons are intended to be used against are a lot closer to home, the very people whose tax dollars pay for them. Caleb Maupin, RT, New York.
The former Minnesota governor and RT America host, Jesse Ventura, does say that the militarization of the police can be seen on the streets.
Why do cops now look like Star Wars commandos? I mean, when they come out and you look at them, they don't look like your friend. They look like an occupying military today. Not only that, I was driving down Minnesota a year or two ago, and I saw on the freeway this big black vehicle looked like it belonged in Iraq. And I pulled alongside and it said, Minnesota State Highway Department. This thing was unbelievable. I mean, it was a combat military machine. We need to get that stuff out of our police forces. I was in the Philippines when Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law. I was physically there, and there were military on every corner with machine guns. Let's not do that.
Now, it is clear that the police in the US aren't feeling much love from the public these days, except one department perhaps in Austin in Texas. However, eagle-eyed users on Twitter have noticed an issue with the notes of support the police department has claimed it's been receiving.
Express how grateful we are to serve you, Austin. Our officers have been working around the clock during these unprecedented times, and thank everyone who took the time to write and make our day a little brighter.
They must think we're pretty dumb.
It's fairly apparent that all of these unaddressed thank you cards were written by the same person.
Wow, you guys really have been working around the clock writing yourselves letters. Such a pretty handwriting. Who's a big strong police officer? You are, that's right, you.
Whoever planned this PR stunt probably shouldn't plan future stunts. I'd call it a joke if it wasn't such a disgrace.
Still to come on the weekly, after tens of thousands of coronavirus deaths in the EU and public anger towards the leadership over the crisis, the bloc is now accusing Russia and China of waging a disinformation war during the pandemic. We'll have a look at what exactly they are saying just after the break.